Hey, what's going on? This is Marcos. Today I want to bring you a conversation with Luke Seerveld. He has a YouTube channel called Meet the Gaffer. He's based in the San Francisco Bay Area, and a lot of his videos focus on his lighting breakdown. So it's a behind the scenes look into professional lighting scenarios. So I've learned a lot from it. You should definitely check it out. There'll be links in the description. Also, since this is a long conversation, there might be an audio version, so check out the description. Also, there'll be timestamps in case you want to skip ahead. So without further ado, let's jump over to our conversation.
I want to talk to you because, I've been a one-man band and I'm making that transition. I want to make that transition into being a videographer into a director of photography, right? I just hate the term videographer. It sounds so cheap because, last year, 2019, I was doing all kinds of work. Funerals. I said I wasn't going to do that again, but I had to, and weddings and whatever came to me, corporate work, all this stuff. This year I'm saying, no, I want to be, take this seriously. I'm going to give myself the title director of photography. And so you're one of the channels that I've been looking at because as I've progressed through my career, I realized lighting is super important. It's more important than the camera, the lens sometimes. It's been very instrumental. Thank you for making the channel, taking the time to create it. I know it's not easy creating content.
Sure.
So maybe we could start there. What made you decide to start the YouTube channel?
Yeah. Well, just in the beginning, it was simply that I wanted to get into producing, actually. And so I spent some time as a producer, more of a line producer. And I found that I, got to a point where I worked on like a commercial with like 50 crew people or whatever. And I got a little far away from the actual work. And so
what do you mean away from the work? You mean not in set?
Exactly, not hands-on. So what it became was a different type of hands-on, but it was more like hands-on a pen, hands-on a computer, hands-on that was a different kind of hands-on than I'd been used to. And I was going in between being a producer and a gaffer. So I was changing hats, and believe it or not, I don't really have the gift of gab to sell. I'm not a salesperson. Yeah. So getting my own clients, that just wasn't a thing I could do well. And I was much better at if someone gave me a client and then I could run with it. But I was making more money as a gaffer than I was as a line producer. Even though you get sort of a higher rate and more days on a particular job, there was no downtime. And so when I really added it up, the hours I was spending, I wasn't making the same kind of money. And I felt like a parent. I would never be able to get away from the job. So then getting a 2-ton truck after having a van for 18 years, I sort of got renewed in my appreciation for the work I was doing as a gaffer. And then this channel, so Meet the Gaffer, I got into that because I thought like, hey, we're all in the film industry. We should all have little videos on our websites. We're really good at promoting everybody else. We're not so good at promoting ourselves. And so I pitched that to a sort of an industry book that had everybody's information. Before everything went online, it was in print. And so I pitched that to the people that had the book that everybody went to, sort of a 911 like they have in LA, but up here in the Bay Area. And they were just like, yeah, no, we're not interested in providing the opportunity for people to have videos along with their listing. So I thought, well, I'll just do it for myself. So I made I thought I'd do one episode just to introduce myself. And then good friend of mine, Alan Steinheimer, said, hey, could you do one for me? So I did one for him. And then he said, you could also talk about these lights that we've been using, this particular light. So then I did, I could do another episode. So, and then it just kind of grew and I thought, maybe we'll do 10. But then it sort of became a thing and I just kept going.
So that's the first video you made. It's on your website, right? This, where you explain what you do. I mean,
That I love my job.
right. And so what do you think video does, or having something like that on your website does? Did it help you at all with landing more jobs or?
Right. So over time, I don't know about one video, but over time, having a vlog, it definitely helps because, and mostly I would say for people who come from out of town, because San Francisco is a place that a lot of people need to come to shoot videos for Silicon Valley companies. So people who come from out of town, if they have seen the vlog, they feel like they already know me. So it's like a sort of a living resume. And so sometimes people will call me being much more familiar with me than I'm ready for, because I don't even know them, but they feel like they know me really well because they've been spending, the last couple of years watching videos. So yes, it certainly helps. And I think even if you had one or two sort of explain what you do, just giving some moving visuals is a step up from just stills.
Well, I think that's true because I mean, I don't think I would be here if you didn't have a YouTube channel. It builds familiarity. And like you said, I feel like I know this person. And how do how do you differentiate you as a gaffer from other gaffers, right? And it comes to, well, having content of yourself, talking and showing your work.
Yeah. And I think people appreciate that you're willing to share. I've spoken to other gaffers in other countries where they'll say, all the gaffers in our area, we don't talk. We're all kind of hostile to each other. And that is a way that people think about life, that I've got mine and it's all for me. And San Francisco is actually a little different in that we're pretty good at sharing. I mean, sure, there are sort of groups of people that, work with this rental house or work with that rental house, but we're small enough where we have to share with each other. So I think we're pretty good about giving names out. If I can't do the job, hey, I give it to, I give a name out for someone else.
So let's back up a little bit. You mentioned you were a line producer, but you felt like you weren't a good salesman. As a line producer, did you have to land more of the jobs yourself?
No. So that's the difference. So as a line producer, an executive producer, someone else got the job and they're like, hey, we need help with this. So we need, a producer to sort of run with it. And then
you have to be there from beginning to end, basically.
Right. Because they're overseeing a number of projects. Here's a project for you. You go after it. And I felt often, working as a crew person for many years, sometimes you get frustrated with the people that are above you. And you think like, you know what? I can do that. It's always easy to downplay another person's job. Like my job's so hard, but those people, they're just sitting on their tush, to do what they do. Well, I think you should spend time in every discipline. You should spend time in every job category so that you can appreciate how difficult it is, or the different things you need to know to make it look easy, whatever. But as I found as a producer, I was okay at it, but it meant I needed to be constantly putting out little fires for everybody. Which is fine, but I had this whole wealth of experience as a lighting person. It's in a way I didn't appreciate that. And so when I got back to it, I had this sort of renewed appreciation of what I do. And then I can feel better about if I feel like a producer doesn't quite know what they're doing, I can be helpful. and I can just embrace that I'm okay with that. I don't need to, be angry about that or tell them they don't know what they're doing or whatever. I help them.
And as a gaffer, you also don't have to be on a project from beginning to end, right? It's just you just show up. You just show up the day of. Is that you get your, I don't know, your production sheet the day before, or do you have to spend more time? Does it depend on the project? How does that work?
So that's a good point, actually, because if you're in camera department or if you're in AC, you get a day of prep. If you're often, if there's a scout or whatever, then, and I'm not always asked to go on a scout. It's better if I can, but and sometimes I'm not available. So, but often you have a bunch of phone calls and you're having to do work or pick up equipment or whatever, and you're not really paid for that. I mean, that's sort of the cost of doing business. But there is on some jobs, there is a fair amount of prep. If it's a really long job, if it was a feature or something like that, you'd get paid for, certain prep days, scouts and all that. But on smaller jobs, not so much.
So what made you go from having a van to a 2-ton truck? Why did you make that switch?
Yeah, I guess I'm not that good at change. So I had a 1-ton, and people would make fun of me because I tried to put so much stuff in that truck. So, it was like Hermione's purse. You could just keep putting things into it.
So at the beginning, also, I mean, I'm assuming you're working smaller projects as opposed to now you're working on, I would say, higher budget projects, right?
Yeah. So
relatively, compared to, there's movies and then there's
lots of different
levels.
A
lot of different layers that you can go into.
Yeah.
So where do you think you are in that spectrum? I mean, there's one-man band, and then maybe there's you somewhere in the middle, then there's movies, right?
Yeah. Well, no. There's a lot more levels than that. Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar.
No, I mean, there's sort of like one-man band. What can you fit in your car? Then what can you fit in a number of cars? So now it's just one-man band. It's just you, camera, sound, lighting, all gets in one vehicle, right? Now, that can be anything from a small hatchback to a minivan to a 1-ton van. That can still be a one-man van. There's gaffers who I call them turtles because they have everything underneath the shell. It's like they have a 1-ton van and you open up the back and it's like, it almost explodes at you because there's so many things stacked in there, and it's very personal, and they figured out how to do it. But then you can have camera shows up in their personal vehicle. You have sound that shows up in their personal vehicle, and you have a lighting person that shows up in their personal vehicle. Now you've got 3 vehicles all filled with stuff, and that's a little larger, type thing. And then just the number of vehicles and the size of vehicles, that's a way to sort of gauge size. And then on features, you're working on 40-footers, and you can have a 40-footer for grip only, and then a 40-footer for lighting only, or a couple 40-footers, for just electric. And then the lights are on a different truck, so it can get out of hand.
Right. And so for, back to, I'm coming from the one-man band, and I'm slowly working on some projects where I need help. So it's a slow progression. And the hardest thing for me when I think of, I'm having a project where I'm having to bring on makeup and sound guy and grip. And so how would someone like me approach a grip? Because I've worked in larger productions where I'm like a camera assistant or a PA, and I've seen there's personalities where, no one wants to seem like they're not knowledgeable. Right. And so if I'm coming as a one-man band, I'm doing the sound, lighting and camera, but someone like you has a lot of experience with lighting. They're probably more knowledgeable than I am. My fear is if I bring on a gaffer, they're gonna impose that, they're gonna let me know you're just a newbie here in this business, right?
Right.
And so how does someone like me approach, someone who's doing gaffing professionally now? If I want to step into
been
those,
doing it for more time,
Right.
yeah. Well, my basic approach is that as the gaffer, it's a hierarchical thing. So it's like an army, like a whatever. I'm there at the behest of the DP. So my job is to make the DP look good. So even if I think the DP, doesn't know what they're doing, it's not my role to take over or whatever. My role is to make them feel good about what's going on. So then you can make suggestions. You can, the approach is to say, well, yeah, we could do it that way. And would you be interested in some of this too? And just make suggestions. So I think that's a better way to deal with inexperience than to be like, oh, come on, we're not going to do that. You're going to want to do this. Yeah, I don't think
but
anybody really
oftentimes
does that. Yeah.
you have more experience with lighting than the DP. I mean, I would
Sure, but
it's
yeah.
What's my question here is, how much direction do they need to give you on how to place lights, or
Sure.
do they just give you tell you I need a high key lighting, or how much direction?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it might depend on the director of photography or the director, whoever that is.
Totally. So as many there's as many ways as there are people, because basically, if you think of a family, or you think of pre-family. So like if you're just a person who lives on their own, and you have a single bedroom apartment, there's a certain way that you deal with your clothes, you deal with your food, you deal with leaving things out or putting stuff away. All of a sudden you bring in another person to share that space. Now you're having to, kind of move around and figure out how we're going to do this little dance. You get married, that's another thing. You have kids. Now you have younger people that you have to sort of bring up to the level of, where you're at. So it's similar on a set. It's like you're creating these little Insta families. The difference is it's more like a business where everybody's being paid to do it. So it's not a volunteer organization. You're being paid. So even if you don't get along, because you're both being paid, you figure it out. If it's a family, you just get pissed off and walk off. That doesn't happen on a set very often. It can. And I've been there, and it's not pretty, but usually people suck it up and figure out how to work together. The perfect situation is collaboration, and that's what you aim for in life, to have a good work experience, to have a good day. And the beauty of being a freelancer is that once you've established yourself, you can choose to be available or not available. You don't say, I'm never going to work with you again. You just say, I'm sorry, I'm not available. I'm already working, or I'm already, I've got a family function, whatever it is. That's once you've established yourself. At the beginning of your career, you don't always have that choice. Yeah. So you just have to work with some jerks, but the, and it's true that you don't have to be a perfectly wonderful person to do well in this business.
I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen that.
Surprisingly.
Yeah.
And that can be true at the top. It can be true halfway through, and it can be true at the bottom. So, but I think the goal is to make the work environment as pleasant as possible. So if people need to be kind of brought along with that, then I think, yeah.
So on a typical set, what kind of direction do you get from the director or DP? Is it just give me high key lighting, or they're not telling you specifically where to place the lights or how to,
Totally depends. So some people are micromanagers. Some people who come from being a one-man band, working on docs or whatever, now they get the opportunity to work on a set with more people. Then sometimes it's not so easy to transition. So they're still saying like, I want this light here. We're going to put this softbox on it. Then we're going to do this. And then, before you move anything, let me know, because then, people can be very micromanager type. That's a possibility. Okay. But eventually you learn that that's not the best way to run things. So you say, let's build a key from this side. Let's make it soft. I was thinking this. What are you thinking? Or what do you have? Or what, and you try to have those conversations ahead of time rather than on set. And there's different ways that, if you're used to having to ask for every little thing, else it won't show up, then you kind of get used to asking for very specific things and saying like, it's got to be these lights, these, and then if the gaffer on the other side says, well, I've got some of those lights. Would you be okay with me, using this instead of that? Does that work for you? Or do I have to, go sub-rent? That's a discussion it's good to have ahead of time. Other people are kind of passive aggressive, where they're just like, I don't really care about, what you do. We'll just light it. And you're like, okay. So you start off and you put up lights and you rough it in. And then when it comes to, there's seating people down and then saying like, oh, not that. Let's move that. Let's do this. And so that totally happens, where people, it's like, where were you when we were setting up? That happens, and you just kind of let, like a duck, you let it roll off your back, water off a duck's back. Anyway, so yeah, it's a personality driven. It's nice to know the technical aspects of it, but it's all about people skills.
So how much pre-production are you doing? Or is that another thing that you do on most sets, pre-production of you talking to the director or the DP about what the day is going to look like? Or is it you just show up and you figure it out the day of?
You try to have discussions ahead of time. But sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes people are flying in from out of town. They don't even have time for their own scout, let alone bringing you on a scout. So then they're like, okay, we got these pictures. And, sometimes a client or representative, whatever, doesn't know how to give you pictures that help you, so they'll say, well, this is the room, but you don't see what the ceiling is like. So you don't know if you can hang anything or rig anything. So having pictures, having, a shot sheet is great, but what you really want are like drawn pictures or stills that kind of show what you're thinking of. If it's just interviews and B-roll, you don't need as much information. You don't need to know sets and all that kind of stuff, but it's still good to have some of the information that you would get on a scout. Where are you going to park? How are you going to get in? Where can we stage things? All those kinds of things.
Yeah, you have a video about that. And that was very...
Windows, electricity, all those things.
All that, restrooms, all that stuff.
But how you talk about a scene or whatever, knowing ahead of time, hey, we're going to need a lot of light because we've got windows. Or we need, we're not going to use any daylight. We're going tungsten. Those are good things to know ahead of time, for sure. Because if I need to sub-rent something.
So, as a gaffer now, is most of your work coming directly from clients or from directors? Where are you getting the bulk of your work? Where's it?
That's a good question. I'd say it's sort of half and half between production company who works with certain DPs, and those certain DPs are used to using me, or I'm on a list of gaffers that they like to work with. And then if the top guy isn't there, maybe I'm number 2, maybe I'm number 3, maybe I'm number 1, it's like, so there's kind of like the local folks that, so then the production person might be calling, but it's because the DP asked for me. Then there's this sort of, all-in-one producer, DP, production company or whatever. They'll call me direct. Sometimes it's, it depends.
So I'm asking just because there was a YouTube comment I saw on your YouTube channel. This guy said something about, well, who the heck is paying for this work? This kind of work, this level of detail. Right. And I don't know how he meant it, but it sounded kind of bad. My thought to that comment was, yeah, who's paying for all this, all these bodies to show up? Because I'm so used to the one-man band fighting with clients. No, we don't need the cutting, trying to get as much out of you as possible. So, it's good to know where that work is coming from, right? And like you said, it's production companies. Mostly it's not direct to client. It's not like a business, let's say sourcing the DP, the director, the gaffer, the sound guy. Usually they go to an agency or production company. And so you're like a third party to the client.
Right. Usually I'm not directly being called by a client like that. It does happen, or an in-house production, a client, a brand that has an in-house folks, they'll call direct. So that's like being called directly by the client in a sense. And there's, it's been going on for years now, but agencies will have their own production companies, so everybody's trying to get a little more of the pie kind of thing. Yeah, right. And so, but usually it's a production company that calls. Yeah. Okay. And then it's just, the size of that production company varies from,
Okay. All right. This gives me a lot of insight. So just some technical questions. Let's say I'm a one-man band like I am right now. And, what light would you recommend to someone like me who still doesn't have maybe the budgets or working on the projects to bring on a gaffer? Is there like a light you say, ooh, this is the light you probably want to have? It'll work on corporate interviews. Is there like any one light that comes to mind?
Yeah.
Or two?
Right. Yeah, no, it's always an interesting question, because when you're a one-man band and you have limited resources, and you tend, this has been my experience, people tend to put their money into camera, because that's what they know, that's what they're really most interested in. And so then audio usually gets a little less attention. And then lighting is kind of like, well, you go to B&H, you get what you can kind of thing. And maybe the color isn't so good. Nowadays, actually, though, the quality of inexpensive LEDs is actually half decent. If you're just needing warm and cool, you want to stay a little bit to known brands, but it is quite amazing, really, what's out there for very little money. In the past, I'd say I would have said Astras. You get a pair of Astras, you can always double them up, put them behind larger diffusion, and if you want a bigger source, the first thing you do, everybody starts with small sources, right? And then you have a bunch of little lights, and sure, that's a way to start. But as you get more involved with lighting, you tend to want to build up a little larger source. So you have a nicer, pleasing light that you have control of. And so you can make that larger source with other smaller sources. Just get diffusion fabric or a pop-up frame or whatever, and then put, and so an Astra, bang for the buck, for quite a while now has actually been really good, because you can either use them together to cluster them for a larger source, or you can separate them out, and then you can have a bounce in the ceiling, you can have something direct through a frame, you can have a little glow in the back, but it's a broad light. It's not a focusable light in that way. You can get the focus version of that, but then and there's value in that too, but it's a little difficult for me in that as a gaffer, I want to have a bunch of tools, and so to say like, okay, that's great. How can you make all those tools you have one multi-tool? That's what people want. They want, what's the multi-tool light that if I have it, I can do everything. Well, it doesn't really exist. And so, if you had like a pair of Astras, and then these are expensive. So, a version of like a Fresnel or more of a point source light, that would be a good thing. And there's a number of manufacturers, Fresnels have kind of fallen on hard times, but point source units are in the sort of LED world are happening, are coming, and there are some available, but inexpensive. I don't know so well, because that's not usually what I'm looking for. Yeah.
So would you also say you want them to be, the Astros are bicolor? Is that a must have, just because you're a one-man band, you're walking into whatever, you have to handle whatever the temperatures, and right, you want to match it to maybe the ambience in the room?
I think it's a good idea. If you're going to choose, go daylight, because, a lot of, just because a lot of your opportunities for lighting, you'll use some window light or whatever to have your larger ambience, and then you can add to that or fill with that. So if you have to choose between warm and cool, I would buy cool. And then, but really nice to have color variability, to be able to tune it. Right. But, and then RGB, in a lot of ways, it's not all it's cracked up to be, because, and even now there's discussions that are current, which is if you want to use color for color's sake, you should actually be gelling your RGB LEDs with color gel. Wow. And, that's a whole deeper discussion, but it's a thing. And people are like, what? I thought the whole idea to have RGB is that you could have, well, it's good to have color. And that's why I like, for an example, Kinoflow lighting. The whole idea is to have an RGB light that also includes a warm white and a cool white. And that way, when you have the middle between those, the fact that you have colors to play with in your curve of white light, you'll actually have a white light in the middle if you need to have one in between, because you have the colors to help you. That's a whole planking curve thing that gets a little deep in the weeds. But so having RGB is helpful as long as you have real white as well. Trying to make white just from RGB is not a good plan.
Which is really hard with cheap RGB lighting. You need to go to the high-end stuff like quasars or sky panels. They're
and
more
even
accurate.
Even sky panels at this point is a little suspect. in some ways, because it's sort of RGB with, one white in a sense. So what's coming out from Airy now will have more colors involved. So you'll add a lime, you'll add another red, you'll add, so having, in a way, in LED terms, Sky Panel is an older technology. It's been out for a few years, and stuff changes so quickly that, now like a DMG Lumiere light has multiple lights. Theater's been doing it forever. And so, yeah, it's an evolving technology that's not, nobody's done it perfectly.
Right. I guess back to the question of what is not the perfect light, but the light that's versatile. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it can get the job done for most people. And for a lot of beginners like myself, we start out with like an Aperture 120D with the light dome. Yeah. And then, but looking at your channel, you never use that type of lighting. It's always frames, and then you're shooting light through. Is that because you're trying to get the light source as big as possible? And I guess also, the other variable is when you have a light dome and it's 32 inches, right, of the light dome, you need to get that as close to the talent as possible. But if they lean in, from what I've seen, is just like the brightness changes very fast, as opposed to having a big frame. You can back it up, and if they lean in, it doesn't change as much. The exposure on the face doesn't change as much.
Right. So, sort of the inverse square law. If you can have a larger source further away, then the change in light is not going to be as great as, with a little bit of movement. If you've got it up close, then what you're saying is, what you've seen is sort of correct, and that's why we like to light with larger sources, and it's also for windows and all that kind of thing. But I have an Aperture 300D, the Mark II version, and actually I have the 1 and the 2 because they sent it to me, and I think they're really solid lights. And their Mark II version, they've really thought that sucker out. It's a nice piece of kit, and it's at a reasonable price. And then having those fronts on them. Yeah, it's daylight only at this point, and they're going to come out with, a tunable version, and they're already making their little, squares of RGB, and they're right there with Quasar having that same discussion about how do we work with these RGB LEDs. So I really appreciate people who are sharing, are getting into education, are saying, hey, we're putting out product that is good, but you have to be knowledgeable, and it doesn't work in every situation unless you do these certain things. So there's no quick fix in some ways, but because the technology is going so quick and costs come down in a lot of ways, there's a lot of good stuff out there, and I'd say Aperture puts out really good things, and there's gold blocks, there's I don't know there's all kinds of stuff, gold blocks, I don't even know how you say it, but there's a lot of sort of stuff from China that
Godox.
Thank you.
Yeah, they send me stuff. Yeah,
Goldilocks. No, that's a different
Goldilocks.
Yeah. But Nan lights. There's all kinds of stuff there that has a lot of output. I have the added issue of needing to have, as a rental company, I need to have the stuff that people ask for. I can have some things that maybe they don't ask for that I can pitch them. But if I have all kinds of off-brand stuff, they're not going to take me seriously. So even if it's the cat's meow, I still have to sell it. And so if you're a one-man band, you can have whatever you want. You can have, made at home stuff, DIY.
I know what you mean. I made a video about that, why gear matters. And I mentioned why I purchased a Sony FS7. Just certain jobs, the presentation is different. They're like, what is that camera? Instead of a small, I used to shoot with the A6300. It just looked like a point and shoot. It just didn't look professional. Yep. And people say gear doesn't matter. That's true if you're not getting paid. But once you're trying to build a reputation, gear matters. Same thing with realtors. They buy nice cars because people judge on looks. And so that's, even though this might be great stuff, you really don't purchase it. You don't pitch it just because you might not be taken seriously. Right. You don't want to be the gaffer that shows up with a kit of Godox. Nothing bad about Godox. It's just it might not be taken seriously.
That wouldn't work for me.
Right.
Now, it's like when the Sky Panel came out, a year later, you go to the trade show and everybody's got their Sky Panel killer. Well, good luck.
I don't like that word when people say that.
Right. It's silly in the first place. But it's like, why don't you come up with a light on your own? Why are you just making the exact same thing? You're saying it's cheaper. It's got better color rendition. It's got, it may have more output, blah, blah. It's great, but we all have our Sky Panels already. So make it different like that we can use, and so anyway, you can make a better mousetrap. Right. It's not always good to be the first, but it's a harder sell especially if there's a brand that everybody kind of expects, then.
Yeah, I heard a gaffer mention that they were going to buy is it Gemini?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
light panels, right? It's cheaper than the Sky Panel, but they said, well, I don't want to, they might not take me seriously, or they might think this is not up to professional level.
Right.
Therefore they might skip on
perfectly good light.
Right. And that's some of the reasons why I've had to upgrade some of my gear, just so, I don't want any negatives or like dings that say, oh, you're good, except you're not showing up with the right gear.
And you can't win that battle at a certain level. You're not going to have an Airy, LF or whatever. You can't afford that. So you have to sort of pick your battles. Right. And yeah.
Right. So just to wrap this up, what would you say? I don't know if you watch much of, cheaper productions. What do you see as being the biggest mistake when it comes to lighting, that people make? Is there like, I don't know, certain things you notice that they could have improved on? Or for someone who's just starting out with lighting?
Well, in a lot of ways, if you're paying attention and you take the time, you can do really good work with next to nothing. Even if you just using windows well. I mean, I don't know that we use them that well here, right. but and if the interview is going to be short, then you can get away with a lot. If it's going to be long, then stuff changes, and that's where it's handy to have a crew, because the light comes around and so that's where it's good to have more control, and that's where you need grippage and or brighter lights or whatever it is.
I also have to add, as a one-man band, there's only so much I can do with lighting. And as I'm trying to increase the production and the quality of the work, the visuals, I realize I can't do this all by myself. There's only so much I can do if I want to get the whole shooting done in 8 hours. So, when it comes to having a gaffer and sound guy, you can focus more on perfecting it. But is there certain things that, any little mistakes that you've seen, or, is it?
Yeah. I think the main thing is you want to have as much control as you can. So even if you don't have the personnel or the gear, you choose spaces that give you some control. So if it's an interview, you're wanting a place where the light doesn't change too much because you can't control that. If it's going to be a long interview, if it's and sound wise, you don't want to be out in the open, even though that's a better look. It's got really great depth of field, all that kind of stuff. But you make those decisions, and then knowing how to use the stuff around you, like, a whiteboard becomes a bounce. If it's one of those rolling whiteboards, maybe use that, as a bounce. So you sort of DIY your environment. You use what you have, and that just comes from experience. Try to make bigger sources. You can do a shower curtain, for something that you shine through, with multiple smaller sources, because that's what you have. Try to make some bigger sources for more pleasing light. Having small units, I think, would be kind of like the thing that I would point to. Having hard shadows, it's just, But I think people are pretty smart.
There's also like very inexpensive, cheap LEDs, and people want to use that as their main key light, and it's only this big. And so, that's something I've probably seen. It's just too harsh, too contrasty. And
right. Yeah. And if you can drive to where you're going, you can pick up old style Kinoflows inexpensively, get a bunch of those. There's nothing wrong with those lights. They're great. Just
with the tubes.
Yeah. You don't have to have the latest and greatest LED, especially if you can't afford it, tungsten lights, they get hot, get some gloves. It's still beautiful light. It's just a nice, pleasing, but for myself, I need to have lights that I can change, color really quickly. I can change, because now DPs are asking for things that they couldn't ask for before as quickly. So I can dial in a Kelvin temperature. Boom. I can change, I can put in a color. I can do a lot of things. I can put it all on wireless. If you're just a one-man band, you don't need all that crap. You don't have to have it on your app. Use some old lights. They're inexpensive. They're available, and they look great. So,
anything I forgot to touch on before I wrap it up?
Oh, so this is just a little aside, but which is kind of a pet peeve I have, which is, especially when someone comes from the one-man band world, and then now they're going to hire you, and they go, "That's great. I'd like to hire you for all your grip stuff, because that's something I don't want to carry. You have all the grip stuff, but I'm going to bring the lights." Well, the truth is, the dirty little secret is that that's how gaffers make their money, off the lights. The grip stuff is almost like a lost leader. We have so much grip stuff that you don't really charge for. You charge a sort of a lump sum for your truck that comes with all the grip. There might be some bigger bounces or something like that you add on. But or the other one is the sort of typical one these days is the DP says, "I'll bring my Dana Dolly, but do you have the rail and the stands?" And you're like, "That's half the Dana Dolly, but you're going to get that price, for your rental, but I'm going to provide 50% of that rental." It's like, so I think having the
reasonable expectations, because I know what you're saying. Coming from the one-man band, you just used to clients that are not willing to pay for this and that. You just, you're fighting the whole way through just to get paid a decent rate. And
you feel you're giving away everything as it is.
Right. And then you come to the bigger, you want to level up bigger productions, and then you realize, well, the gaffer costs this much, the grip, the sound guy's making that much. And then you realize, what? I'm running sound for nothing. And so it's hard for them to wrap their heads around
Absolutely.
what the bigger productions require.
Totally get it. But they'll find if they get a job that's going to pay them, that will pay them for all their gear, they'll jump off your job. They may give you another person to work with, but it's not, they'll put you at the bottom of the list in that way, because they're like, yeah, he's a nice guy, but he wants to bring all his own stuff. And then I'm just there to, bring the things that don't really make a whole lot of money.
Right. Yeah, we all need to make a living. I mean, I totally understand. And that's the thing, why it's good talking to you, because there's a lot of people that maybe want to make that jump, but they just don't understand that, there's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of things you need to keep keep up with the lights, and that's expensive. And
that's the other thing too. The DP says, or the production company, because it's really small or whatever, it's like, hey, these are the lights we want to use. And then they give you their kit, but because they don't use it every time, there's things missing, or whatever. I mean, that happens with cameras too, but it's like, where you have the exact same thing, but it has everything in it, or they show up with stuff, but they don't have the particular controllers for it or whatever. So then you like, okay, I'm bringing these, but I'm not getting paid for it because we're using your lights. Anyway, it's just a
well, I mean, I think this conversation helps me understand, because it's kind of scary to me. Like now you're in charge of, guiding someone how you want things, and maybe I'm not such a good manager, or maybe I should know more than the gaffer and the grip, and often that's not the case. So it's okay for me not to, be at their level.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because, if you're doing your job, you're helping people. You're not posing. You're not saying like, oh, stay in your silo, stay in your lane. You're collaborating. And so, you can say, well, this is what I'm thinking. Any thoughts on that? Or, or I was thinking we could do something like that, or do you have something that would be better? Just having that approach, I think totally works.
Well, thank you, for this conversation. I know it's going to help a lot of people who are maybe in my same shoes, who maybe they can dream about maybe hiring a grip or a gaffer on their project. So if they want to step up their game, because there's only so much you can do by yourself. And so, appreciate it. Where do people catch you? I'll have links if you want
to. Meet the Gaffer, or, my website is just Seerveld.com.
Yeah, I've learned a lot. So definitely go ahead and check it out. Thank you again.
Cool. Hey, good conversation. Hope I didn't go off the topics too much.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
All right.